Bring up that topic.
No. Good morning. Welcome to 59 Minutes. My name is Levi Kones. This morning we're going to be talking about a gentleman who's written a book. The book is called The Path to Kaliech. It's the outside story of William Odongo OMAMO. He was a cabinet minister back in the 80s. And he was in parliament for the first time in 1969.
Yes, indeed.
Actually, you know what I was thinking? He's been in parliament in the 60s, because that was 69, in the 70s until 74, in the 80s, in the 90s when he entered, and in the early 2000s. For every decade that he tried his hand at parliament since independence, he put a foothold in there.
Yeah, it's close to 40 years thereabout.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Bob OMAMO is my guest. He wrote this book. And you say it's with the help of your dad, really, because you took some of his notes. And I looked at some of the notes. Let me start by asking you. There's a note here I see, several notes he wrote here about 1989, Kano elections, 1992 there.
Yes.
It seems to me like in his notes, if this is a picture of the notes,
yes,
it wasn't very, how do I put it? He didn't write a whole lot. How did you get all the meat in?
Actually, he wrote quite a lot. I have to correct that. So he left a jumbled up manuscript with lots of things.
Or pointers to up.
Yes, here and there, but it didn't flow like a book. You know, it was jumbled up. When he would think of something, he would jot it down. So my job, since he passed on before he had completed that, was to now put it into the form of a book. So there were many missing dates, missing characters that need to be filled in. And then I had to maintain his voice. Then that was the hardest part, I could say, of the book, because Mze's voice was a very powerful voice. And I
Boisterous.
Yes. So, I had to maintain that in his book. Yeah.
So that, okay, so in the notes that he was writing, at the point that he was writing it, did you ever get an idea of what he would have called the book? Did he ever mention? Or was he just writing fast with?
I can say I wouldn't know. But I know that whatever he would call it would have Kaliech in it, or an elephant in it, one way or another. Yeah. Yeah. That is one thing I was sure about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. It's quite a good piece, by the way.
Thank you.
And it takes you really back into the annals of history, especially when you go into the beginnings of his school days and what was happening. You know, you fixing things that were happening at certain intervals in history with what was happening in his life. And some of them are now, explained in detail. It's very intriguing.
Thanks. Yeah, the book is very detailed. My dad was a man who was into detail. I don't know if you got that impression when you read the book. He was very observant with his surroundings, because one of the questions I've been asked by a lot of people is, how is it that he was able to remember so many things, so many dates, to the very small details? And it was more or less the kind of life he lived. He was a very observant person. He was a keen listener. And that comes out also in the book. He listened to his advice of the elders, and that helped him in piecing up the book together. Yeah. You'll realize also from the book that even when he talks of his lineage, he goes down 17 generations. You have to be very keen to be able to capture that.
Yeah, true.
Yeah.
I can't go 17 generations myself. I think 1 or 2 and then we are done. By the time you were being born, he was a cabinet minister, if my calculations are correct.
Yes. I was born when smack at the middle of him.
Yeah, when the flag was in the home.
Yes, it was.
Do you remember anything from that time?
Oh, yes, I do. I mean, I lived through it. I mean, because he stopped being a cabinet minister in 1987. I remember that very well. I remember the cars with the flag, being dropped in school with a car with a flag. That I remember very well, even though I was young.
Yeah. In those days, in fact, you write about the story about how that drop came about. And it's interesting in looking at his life with the life of Jaramogi.
Yes.
That in one way, Jaramogi was a nemesis. In another way, your dad attributed, some help to have come from him in going to to India, for example.
Yeah.
And that got him in trouble.
Yeah, so my dad's relationship with Jaramogi is a very interesting one,
Yeah.
I must say. So Jaramogi is like an older cousin, not uncle, but cousin. In our lineage, Jaramogi and my dad, and of course us, the descendants, we meet at one of my dad's forefathers called Nyebenya, because Jaramogi is a descendant of Nyebenya's wife, who was called Owak, and my dad is a descendant of Nyebenya's wife called Kwodi. So they are blood ties. Those are strong blood ties in Sakwa, where we are from, in Bondo. That's why I always tell people that, Raila is my cousin. And people usually laugh, but it's actually the truth, to the extent that Raila's daughter, for instance, let's say Winnie, I wouldn't marry her even if I was looking for a second wife, which I'm not. but I wouldn't be allowed.
Good to clarify.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
that is one thing that people do not know. And then the other thing is that because of these connections, when my dad was in primary school at Maseno School, because back then Maseno had the primary section and the high school section, and he started from the primary section, and it's at that point when Jaramogi noticed him, because Jaramogi noticed him when he had come for an old boys meeting, and he quickly realized that my dad was talented in the things that he did in drama. And it's from there that the relationship started, to the extent that when my dad completed his O-levels at Maseno, Jaramogi found it very easy in pushing to get him a scholarship to study in India. And one thing that's not known as well, even when he was in India, and that is a story that we've seen pictures over the years, Jaramogi went and visited him in India. So this is someone these are people who are close.
Yeah.
But then the media would always be quick to twist quite a bit of things. But then apart from that, the bigger story is that my father, when he eventually joined politics in 1969, he gets stuck in the middle of a fight between Jaramogi
And Kenyatta. Yeah.
And this is a fight that had begun long before my dad had joined politics. And yeah, that is explained quite well in the book.
It's explained quite well. Actually, it even talks about what happened in 1974.
Yes.
And how the laws came about.
Yes.
And then, your father was very resilient, kept bouncing back to parliament. I was just thinking about the losses in 74, in 88.
79 as well.
Yeah, yes, in 79 as well. And even when he went up against Jaramogi himself in 92,
yes.
And the subsequent by-election as well.
Yes.
By the time he was losing to Jaramogi himself, and then the by-election 94, I think you were possibly a teenager by then.
No, I was still in primary school.
You're still in primary school.
But I remember it.
Do you remember
very,
the period of loss? Tell me about that.
Yes, the period of loss is something I remember quite well, because when he lost to Jaramogi in 1992, I was actually in class 5. But that time we were young, but you could say that I was exposed politically, you could say, from 1992. Because that was the first multi-party election. My dad remained in Kanu at that time, and Bondo was an opposition stronghold. You could even say the headquarters of opposition. And so after his loss, I remember how people would laugh at us in school. Actually, even before that, in 88, I remember it. In class 1, I remember being teased in school that your dad is no longer an MP, And of course it hurt, but it also prepared us for life, because these losses and how my dad dealt with them helped prepare us on how to live our lives. An election loss is not the end of life. You just move on. You get on with whatever you are doing before that. And for him, he used to retreat to his farms and continue with his farming activities.
Because that bouncing back in 97 was quite something.
It was. Actually, it surprised many. Of course, when he actually ended up running on NDP, which was
the
an
tractor,
Odinga party. Yes. And but he fit the bill for Muhoroni at that time. He fit the bill as the book mentions. He had been a farmer of sugarcane since 1968.
Yeah.
So, and he was an agriculturalist. And Muhoroni it's all to do with agriculture. Those are the main issues.
Yeah.
In Muhoroni.
Tell me about how his his how do I call it, his strides in education have a bearing on your life, because I see he went to Maseno, he went to India.
Yeah.
At one time he was chairman of, what do they call it, the I forget the exact name of
the university, the council.
The council, yes.
Yeah, the council of the University of Nairobi.
So clearly he was pretty, how do I put it? Pretty much entrenched in matters of education. How did that play out for you?
He was an academician, so to speak, because he was principal of Egerton, the first African principal of Egerton, from 1966. Is it 66? No, 65. 65, all the way till 1969. So, to your question, my dad always made us aim high academically. And it's no surprise that my siblings and I have generally done fairly okay in school. And out there in our careers, we are littered all over in different careers. And that made him proud.
Was he a guy who would check your homework and, ask you what's up after boarding?
He didn't need to check our homework. Just by him asking, that was enough. That was enough to instill fear.
Yeah.
But it was more of the respect we had for him.
Yeah.
You could say he had a very big personality, and his personality, it loomed large in the home.
Yeah.
So we always, all of us, all 16 children, 2 mothers, we always didn't want to disappoint our father. That was one thing that kept us going.
Yeah.
And there was always reward if you did well in school. In my case, the sister that I follow, Elizabeth, was always first in class, and she always got presents from dad because of that. Us who never became number 1, we were always working hard towards it. We always strived towards becoming position 1.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that was just one of his styles. He put academics up there. Yeah. And what he did for Kenya in academics is also big. I mean, he headed Egerton. He headed the University of Nairobi. He was the chairman of the University of Nairobi Council. He also chaired the Maseno University Council as well, which of course then laid the foundation stone for what we have as Maseno University now. Yeah.
True. Tell me, in the latter years of his life, when you are now, an adult yourself, because I was curious to find out, like, between 2002 and the time that he passed in 2010, what were those years like for him?
You could say he mellowed down naturally. He engaged in his other love, which was agriculture.
Yeah.
And so it was more of agriculture through and through. And he kept himself busy. He also, liked reading, and he took the time to...
He was at home mashambani most of the time.
Yes. And he actually never ever considered himself a town guy. My father, from 1969 when he joined Parliament, all the way till the time when he retired in 2002. This was a man who, when Parliament would close when the second session of
go for
Thursday,
recess. Yeah.
No, not recess.
It was Thursday to
It was
Tuesday.
Thursday. He would hit the road and go home. Weekends would find him up country without fail. So we have a current crop of MPs who are known to always be in Nairobi. In his case, Nairobi was only for parliamentary work in Parliament. After that, he would be down Mashinani, either in Bondo or at his farms in Chemele.
Yeah. How long did it take you to write this book?
So, my father wrote the book. That is one thing.
To compile it, I mean.
Yes,
Yeah.
so I could probably give the journey of the book.
Yeah.
He started writing this book in 1988 after he was rigged out of the Mulolongo election.
Yeah.
An election that is
The infamous one.
The infamous Mulolongo
Yes.
election. So he intermittently wrote it between 1988 and 2008. So you could say, with my father, his journey was 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
But the book, you could say it was a manuscript. It was a raw manuscript with his thoughts that needed to be put together. So you could say that between 2010, when he passed away, and 2020, the first 10 years of his death, the manuscript was gathering dust. And
Had you thought about it yourself?
I thought about it, yes, I had. Soon after his death, you could say I became the lone voice in the family, keeping on asking about the release of Dad's book, how he could work on it. But how to do it was what I didn't know. And at a point, I had to understand as well that the family is big, people are doing all sorts of different things out there.
Yeah.
It needed one person to take the challenge.
Yeah.
So I took the challenge in 2020, during his 10th anniversary. I took time to write as a tribute to him on Facebook.
What month is that of his anniversary?
This was April, April 2020. If you remember, that was just
COVID
soon
time.
after. Yes, soon after we went on lockdown, the very first lockdown for COVID. So I did a 7-day tribute for him on Facebook. And on those 7 days, I had a different story about him for 7 days. Some of them were picked up from his manuscript. Some of them were just my personal stories with him. And the response was overwhelming from Facebook. My friends and family kept on telling me that you need to write a book on your father. What they didn't know is that there was actually something, a skeleton that I could use. So once I realized that his story is still relevant, I took it upon myself in April 2020 to start writing the book, putting it together. And it's a journey that took me 2.5 years. And that's where here we are today.
Well, here we are today. I'm going to take a quick break on that note. When we come back, we are talking about the memoirs of William Odongo OMAMO. We'll be right back.